I don't eat vegetables for
I'm
breakfast.
just going to chop up. I actually don't eat vegetables and just leave it there.
I need hot breakfast when I leave. You gonna miss your opportunity.
Let's keep the show quick. Let's do like a 40-minute show.
Shot clock.
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
What's the
What's the
deal?
deal?
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
Yo, what's the deal?
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
What's the deal?
Hey, what's the deal?
What's good, everybody? I'm Steve Discourse.
What up, y'all? It's your girl, Jay Callie.
Back again with another episode of What's the Deal?
Hey, this week on the show, we're going to be talking about the terrorist church fires that took place a little while ago.
Down in Louisiana. We've also got a really tragic, really kind of infuriating story about some adoptive women who murdered their 6 children that they recently adopted.
Definitely infuriating. We also have the story of Albert Wilson, who was sentenced to 12 years for kissing an underage girl. We'll get into it a little later.
And on a positive note, out in Newark, New Jersey, we got a school program for Friday nights that allows teens to come into the school to avoid violence and other trappings and dangers out there in the streets.
Yep, you already know we got to talk about Don't Mute DC. What happened to the go-go music? We can give y'all the update.
Okay. And finally, in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., a recent vote to pay reparations to the descendants of sold slaves. So we're going to get to all those good stories at the end of the show to kind of end on a positive note, because we don't get to do that often. But we got to start with all the heavy stuff. So, Jay Callie, what do you got for us here?
All right, so you all may have heard on the news, you may have been keeping yourself up with this story, but last year in March 2018, there was I don't even want to say headline news because it wasn't headline even though it should have been, but Sarah and Jennifer Hart, who were, 2 white women who adopted the 6 Hart, they're being known as the Hart children now, they were found dead, all of them at the bottom of a cliff. The car was it was down in the water. The bodies were floating around. The car was totally destroyed. And there was this big question of, was this intentional? Was this an accident? What happened? It's so sad what happened to this family and their kids. This family had a beautiful reputation. Devontae Hart, who went viral during all the riots, during the Ferguson protests for giving away free hugs. So that's why this family was kind of, people knew who they were. Well, this past week, on April 5th, it was decided and concluded that this was a murder-suicide, that these 2 women planned, this elaborate scheme to drug up the entire family to get drunk and to intentionally drive them off the side of the cliff because apparently there was an open investigation because they were accused of child abuse, basically. And the system was after them. They had left home a few times. They had missed their appointments. And eventually, I assumed they decided, hey, we would rather go down than have to face the music. And
So these women were kind of on the run from this, the adoptive agency and the process?
it was not the adoptive agency that they were on the run from. It was the Department of Social Services. They had been reported. There was an open investigation for child abuse. It had happened many times in the past. Like the kids would go to school and report abuse. There was investigations where they were found to be perpetrators of abuse. But recently another case had opened up, and I guess they just didn't want to go through this again, especially because there was a lot of dispute around whether or not these children were better off just going back with their regular families, but they had been adopted already, so that wasn't really an option.
Okay, so rewind that and unpack that real quick. Why were they adopted if they have other families?
Well, the kids the families that they were with, their biological families, were deemed unfit. So the kids got put into the system. Okay. I don't want to say what typically happens, but I think that the family was told that there would be an opportunity for them to get the children back. The kids were in the system, essentially like foster care. But what happened was Jennifer and Sarah Hart adopted these kids, which once kids are adopted, there is no, you can go back to your mom now. No, these people are now your legal parents. They're not your guardians. They're your legal parents. So the families were like, what? We thought we were going to get our kids back. No, you can't get your kids back. Only to, a couple years later. It's not like they raised these kids from babies. They had just got them as grown, like kids, adolescents. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
So how long had these women had?
I don't remember off the top of my head,
guardianship,
but it
roughly?
was no more than like 3 years.
It was just a couple years.
They adopted the first 3 sets of kids. It was 3 siblings and then 3 siblings.
Okay.
They had 6 kids altogether. They adopted the first 3, and then they adopted the second 3 a short while after. So they had the kids maybe 3 years.
Do we know anything about these women's past before the adoption?
No, the adoption didn't become sensational until after they went viral with the free hugs thing. But then they really became known as like this happy-go-lucky family. There's videos of them on the internet at like all these Bernie Sanders rallies and being super democratic and super liberal and like peace marches and giving away free hugs all across America. And you would see little Devontae Hart with his free hug sign a lot more ever since it went viral. He was hugging this police officer and he had these tears like streaming down his face. And it was just, know the kid. Yeah, it was like it was a very famous picture.
When I heard about the deaths last year, I didn't.
Is that kid?
I somehow I missed that whole connection.
It was a little black boy at the Ferguson riots hugging a white cop, and he is just crying. And the picture was famous for that whole year. It became like one of the pictures of that movement. So that's how this family became famous. But the issue, now, other than the fact that it's been kept so low key, because like the deaths were planned. Like they went through their phone records and they had been Googling for like that whole week, how many Benadryl will it take to kill me? Or like, what does it feel like if you die by drowning? You know what I'm saying? Like really planning out their own murder suicide. And then, they checked the computer inside the car and it showed like this car stopped and then accelerated over the side of the cliff.
Wow.
So a lot of people, when this first came out last year, were like, the Hart family, Sarah and Jennifer Hart, were the most beautiful souls I've ever met. And the fact that there's even a question as to whether they would do this on purpose is enraging. Like there was outrage that people would even assume that they were capable of doing this on purpose. They loved those children. They wouldn't hurt a fly. And it's like, y'all are talking very highly about women who have known open child abuse claim. So then it became like this back and forth between people who are like they did it on purpose and people who were adamant that they didn't. So it's kind of a big deal that it's come out now that like, yes, they planned the murder suicide of themselves and 6 innocent children whom had families that wanted them back. You understand? So it's a question of how can our system continuously fail Black children in this way, that you remove them from a home because their parents were deemed unfit, and you allow them to remain in a house where they were being abused. They were being withheld. Food was being withheld from them. They were knocking on their neighbors' doors saying, we haven't eaten in 3 days. We got in trouble. Can you please give us food? They were sneaking out the windows, right? Like the kids were going to school with bruises on their bodies and telling their teachers, yeah, my mom beat me for a long time last night. Like, and you allow them to stay in this house and to keep up this pretense persona of this big, happy family, white saviors, adopting all these Black kids and saving them from their terrible Black moms, right? Like, that's the way I read it, because it's infuriating, for real. Like, and I think that there's this bias and there's this like white savior thing that really played into why they were allowed to have these kids, because I something that we've seen play out before. Not the murder suicide, but just like going in and saving these kids from the hood, and no matter what the situation, because you have a big house, a single family house and a beautiful car, and you're this super liberal lesbian Bernie Sanders couple, you can do no wrong, when in fact you are very wrong and you kill those children because of your ego.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to wonder what kind of biases were at play.
Right.
And also I think even aside from those, you got to wonder if these are newly adoptive parents and then so soon after allegations of abuse are coming up. I mean, I don't know the policies and laws in place regarding adoption, but there's got to be like a buffer time period when like, okay, hold on, you guys, you haven't had these kids long enough. This has happened too fast.
Take them back.
We might have to reel this in or slow this down, and there's probably a whole lot of reasons legally why that would be complicated or something, and that may not exist in the legal framework right now. But that's, I mean, yeah. And then you're right though. I think the bias probably plays a big role, because I think in a lot of ways we tend to give the benefit of the doubt. I think, this is no surprise, and we've talked about things like this on the show, to white people who otherwise maybe would be questionable if they were other races.
Right. So it's just a really sad story to hear about it, because it's not a small failure within our system. It's a massive failure, okay? 8 lives were lost, 6 of which were children, black children, who, were already very unhappy and had already been mistreated in their original homes, and then went here and continued to be mistreated, and were just really dealt the short stick at life, and then life to be tragically ended in this way. It's more than infuriating. It's also just depressing. It's very depressing, and just pray for their spirits.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could probably have a whole series of interviews about the adoption and foster care system, like one of so many of our institutions in this country that's just overstressed and maybe underregulated and doesn't have enough supervision and oversight.
Right.
And so shifting gears to the next story, still with the idea in mind of kind of giving people benefit of the doubt and things like that. We've got this case of the church bombings, church fires in Louisiana. And 21-year-old man named Holden Matthews has been arrested for, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence placing him essentially as the perpetrator here. And there's a white man burns down 3 black churches in this parish in Louisiana, St. Landry's Parish. And we've got a history in this country of white people attacking black churches politically for politically motivated reasons, in Reconstruction, after the Civil War, when people were freed, all through the Civil Rights era, and Jim Crow. This is a go-to tactic, and it's a terrorist tactic. It just plain and simple is. But we're not calling this man a terrorist,
right?
Because there's other reasons, and there's other labels we can give him, because we just can't do that. We have a hard time collectively in this country doing that to white people and labeling them that way.
Yep.
But let this be a Christian church bombed by a Muslim, and it's not even a question, right? People are going to have to say, well, maybe this person was just unhinged. You'd have to really fight to make the argument that it's not, because the default would be it's terrorism. And that's what this is, and whether he had a specific goal in mind or whether he was just, I don't know, feeling the same angst and threat that a lot of, it hasn't been reported directly that he's a Trump supporter, but that a lot of Trump supporters have said that they feel that there's this cultural kind of threat to them. We saw this in Charlottesville, with the chance of Jews will not replace us and things like that. I mean, it's just really insane with the history of political attacks like this, that we're not calling this a terrorist attack, which is just what it is.
But we never called these types of attacks terrorist attacks. Like when we see these white people going into churches or going into schools or wherever the white people decide they're going to commit mass shootings or what have you, we are very, not even hesitant. We just refuse to label it as terrorism, because the word terrorist now has this different type of connotation in the United States of America, where a white man just simply doesn't fit the description. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think that plays into it for sure.
Absolutely right, yeah. And, I mean, it's just, I mean, in this parish has had a history specifically of church bombings. It's happened before. I was reading about some that happened in 1968, and then even in the 90s. This goes a little bit ahead of my own political history and awareness. In the 90s, Bill Clinton had to establish a church arson task force because there had been church fires and bombings recently, which were actually following a couple years after the election of David Duke to the Senate, who was a prominent white supremacist.
Right, and member of the KKK.
And what's interesting about that is that's a direct parallel to some research that came out last month, I think, showing that in counties where President Trump had election campaign rallies, hate crimes rose 216%. 216%. That means there's 3 times as many hate crimes in counties where he had a rally. And when I learned that about this church arson task force from Bill Clinton in the wake of David Duke's election, it's like, if you don't believe that the way Trump talks and acts has actual implications in the behavior of people in the real world, it does. And that, to me, really brought it home. And I think it's still going to be a hard sell for people who don't want to believe it, because they just don't want to believe it. But the things we say and do, and the things we hear and see people say and do, have impacts on us. And then when it's the president of the United States, people can't tell you nothing.
Right.
I can do this. The president does it. If the president does it, I can do it, right? So in a very real way, they set the tone, right? This is the most powerful man in the country. If he can do A or B or C, why can't the rest of us, right? And it's very dangerous. And I mean, there's really nothing left to say to me. There's a history of this. It's terrorism.
It is.
And we got to move on from that. I just don't want to keep going on over it.
You know what? It's actually crazy, because I think today that there's kind of a theme between, like, the difference between the way white people are perceived when they do a thing versus the way black people are perceived when they do a thing that's the same or very similar. So the next story is kind of still in theme of that. I don't know if you guys have heard about this story, but there is a 23-year-old man. His name is Albert N. Wilson, and he was recently sentenced to 12 years in prison for what, people are saying, essentially, he made out with a girl that he met at the bar, and she turned out to be underage, and he was convicted of raping this girl, and he claims that, okay, we never even had sex, so why am I being convicted of rape? And so the way the story goes is that, it's 2016, they're both in this bar called Jayhawk Cafe, and they're, like, dancing together, they're getting their groove on, blah, 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 blah. They start making out on the dance floor. They're in the middle of the floor. Everybody sees them making out. And he takes the girl home. They make out at home. He says, yes, we did sexual things. We were making out, but we never had sex. And there's video footage of them leaving the bar. And then 5 minutes later, you see, they come back. So they were only gone for 5 minutes. This girl turns out to be 17 years old. He was 20 years old. Neither of them should have even been in the bar in the first place. They were both underage. But, she's like, okay, well, he raped me. I didn't want to do any of that stuff with him. I was drunk. He took advantage of me. The way the story always goes, right? So it takes 3 years for all of these pieces to come together. They do like a DNA swab. They find his DNA present on her in saliva only. That's the only DNA that they found of him on her. However, so let me just start off here. The jury that convicted him, the jury that found him guilty, it was 9 white women and 3 white men. I already find that to be quite biased, that the jury is literally 75% female and 100% white. In a case of rape, when the victim is a white woman.
And the man was?
The man was black.
Okay.
Albert.
I don't know if you said it, or maybe I missed it when you said it.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I maybe didn't make it clear. Albert Wilson is a black college student, and this girl was a white student. I'm not sure if at the time she was in college or high school. She was 17, so right. It could have been either one. She could have been a freshman, or she could have been a high school senior. The point is, they're telling 2 totally different stories, where she's saying it was rape, and he's saying I didn't have sex with you. And the jury was just like, well, you're guilty. And now he's been sentenced to 12 years. He's got a lifetime of probation. He's also have to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. So people are kind of like, that's interesting, because Brock Turner was literally caught in the act of raping a drunk girl. And it was like this whole, do we even want to get him in trouble at all? Then he ends up doing like 3 months in jail and comes right back to his regular life. And then you have this black guy where, first of all, why are they in this bar? Can we even talk about the fact that, like, why weren't they carded? Everyone in there is assuming that everyone in there is 21 just off the strength of we're in a bar, right? And she turns out to be 17, and then she gets to say, I was raped. Anyway, it's all just very scandalous and very just like, what is going on?
Did her age, how much did her age at the time come into play in the trial? Do you know?
No, I don't know how much her age came into play. I think that, yes, it was problematic that she was 17, but I think that the thing that they're really harping on is the rape accusation. That she said it was against my will and I was intoxicated. And he basically said, well, first of all, you seemed sober, which men say that. But then he was like, but it wasn't against your will. Like, I asked you to come home with me and you came. We fooled around and we came back. It was a couple minutes of my life. And I have to serve 12 years is just a really long time. It's a very harsh sentence. It's just a very harsh sentence.
Well, it's harsh if you take his word for it that, it was just some making out and stuff, then it seems super harsh. Yeah, even if it wasn't against her will. And we don't know what happened in that time. So if it was seemingly all consensual and everything like he says, then this is clearly, really wildly unjust. If it was like she said, then I don't know, 12 years maybe. But I think, really you bring the interesting point of the disparity in judgments, right? With Brock Turner. And I mean, we didn't even bother to compile an exhaustive list of how many times we've seen white assailants get off with I mean, we talked on this podcast about the man a couple months ago who was, while on probation for rape, got arrested for rape,
right,
and got probation, or what was it, or was a very short sentence. I can't remember because we already talked about it, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, like, the disparities in criminal justice outcomes in almost like exact circumstances, and you just change the race of the perpetrator, is really scandalous, and it's wild. And it's not to say that if you're guilty of a crime you shouldn't be held accountable, but I mean, hopefully it's to say, okay, well, let's stop giving certain people a total pass. And it comes because we see this, and honestly, for white people, you look at these people and you say, all right, well, I can see myself in this person somehow, right? I can see my son or family or whatever, and he's a good guy. Like, I don't know, I feel bad for him, I feel for him, and like, it was a mistake. Let's not ruin the rest of his life for 2 minutes of indiscretion, even though it was raping an incapacitated woman, like in an alleyway. That's nuts. That's nuts. And then we look at someone who doesn't look like us, who we can't see the shared humanity of,
exactly.
And I can't relate. And this guy, what do we know from stereotypes and crime statistics and pop culture and everything? Well, we know that he's probably a bad dude, like, exactly. So, and he's accused of rape,
and he's
so
an
let's just throw him under
that.
Oh yeah,
it builds onto the stereotypes.
He's hitting all the stereotypes,
which is why in America, in our judicial system, we say that you have a right to a jury of your peers, and I think that we really need to take a deep look into, like, what exactly does that mean? Because 9 white women from Kansas doesn't seem like a jury of his peers. Like, granted, location, yeah, they all live in a similar location. He's also a college student and with the school in Kansas, so it's still not very relatable. They can relate a lot more to the young lady. And women, I've always been an advocate for women's rights. It shouldn't be unclear. In 2016, I don't think the conversation of, like, Me Too and of, like, rape and of, like, what is consent, what isn't consent. If she doesn't say yes, then it's not yes. If you got to be careful. And I think that men kind of get it a little bit more now in 2019 than they did even a few years ago. Even though I do think that y'all still have a lot, and I'm talking directly to, like, men, y'all still have a lot more learning and growing to do when it comes to what is consent. Because the issue, I think the biggest issue here, when he can talk about whether you had intercourse or whatever happened once you got inside of your place on the dance floor, you lifted her skirt up without her permission. And that opens the door for someone to accuse you of rape, because don't touch me. I am dancing with you. And if I do decide that I want to kiss you, okay. Do not take it upon yourself to go under my clothes. Don't touch me. And it is too much. It is not okay that you, if that's true, because this is what she's saying, if it's true, do not go under my clothes. I did not permit you to do that. And even if I leave with you, you don't know how much pressure I now feel. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He was wrong for that, and I can openly admit that. Don't go up a woman's skirt. Don't go up a woman's shirt. Don't grope all over my body, period. Don't touch me.
That's fair. Well, and it's funny, when you say that we kind of get it a little bit more now.
Yeah.
And we do to an extent, just in the way people are reacting, like, oh man, I'm afraid to even talk to a woman now and everything. It's like, well, you know what? We've been having pretty free reign for a long time. So, all right, so we gotta pump the brakes a little bit, right, and be worried that we're gonna be all right. You know what? That seems fine. If that's what we got to deal with, so be it. To sort of learn a little bit of our lesson here, right? Yeah, and this is a tricky story here specifically for that reason, because we don't want to undermine, this woman's claim that she was violated and assaulted, but at the same time, we also want to acknowledge the historical fact that the justice system is weighs against this man who's accused overall in general. Again, not to call into question his accuser, right, but just so these two uncomfortable truths are there, that a lot of times we don't believe women, but a lot of times men also do act too aggressively towards women. But at the same time, now when it comes to the criminal justice system, if it's black versus white, we know which way the chips are going to fall pretty much every time. Right.
Exactly.
The Vegas odds are pretty good on that. So we got a lot to do with being honest about our biases and picking these up. I'm actually reading a book right now called Biased, by a woman who's a social psychologist, mm-hmm, and researcher, and she does a lot of trainings with police forces to help them understand their bias, to hopefully check that in the heat of the moment and everything. It's pretty interesting so far, but I'm still early in on it. So anyway, should we take a break and then come back with some stories that are actually kind of on the upside?
Let's turn it around.
Okay.
I agree.
Bet. Let's do it. We'll be right back.
While we're on this break, we want to remind you, do not forget to share the podcast. Share it to all of your social media platforms, your Facebook, your Instagram, Twitter. Don't forget to use the hashtag #What'sTheDealPod whenever you share anything. And like and subscribe the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you listen. Thanks for spreading the love. We appreciate you. All right, y'all, we are back. You already know who it is. It's your girl, Jay Callie.
Steve Discourse.
And we were just leaving off a nice, strong break. We coming back. We want to talk about Don't Mute DC. If y'all haven't heard, DC got hyped this week. Steve, what's going on?
Well, oh, man, it was huge. It was big. So if you're not familiar with DC, because not all of our listeners are local, mm-hmm, to the area, there's a specific corner in a very busy neighborhood right near Howard University,
yep,
Georgia Avenue and Florida Avenue,
yep,
right near U Street. It's a big, busy intersection, a lot of nightlife, a lot of life overall, restaurants, businesses, everything. There's a little Metro PCS retailer, and they sell go-go music and albums and stuff. They've been playing music through speakers out of this store for almost 25 years.
Right.
All day, every day. They cut it off in the evening sometime. It's not 24/7, but all day they're playing this music, and people love it. Some people don't like it, but nothing's absolute, right? Some people probably don't like it, but generally speaking, this is a cultural landmark. This is a massive hub. They're playing not just music, go-go music.
Okay, so go-go is like every city has its sound, right? Culturally, places have their sound. Jamaica, they have reggae, right? They have soca in Trinidad and Tobago. In D.C., we have go-go. It's a big deal. It's on the radio. It's bumping. Friday nights, it's lit on the radio station. Everything is like going crazy. I remember as a kid just looking forward to like when the nighttime comes and it's the weekend, that go-go is going to be playing. My mom and my dad love it. It's a lot of drumming. It's go-go. It's hard to really, right? If you're a teenager, when you're a teenager in D.C., you might have went to these parties called go-go's. You just go, and everybody's in a band. Everybody's rocking. It's just like the heartbeat of the city. So that little corner on Georgia and Florida, when you walk by, it's like, I'm about to go get on the metro, I'm about to go to the barbershop, or wherever you're going, you know you're going to get to bump a little while on your way walking down there.
Yeah. And again, it's also right next to Howard University.
Exactly.
So all these students coming from around the country are also then like maybe not indoctrinated is a weird word, but they're exposed to it as well. So they buy in, and the heartbeat of the city is a really good way to put it, because it's got that rhythm of the music. So that's why it's not just any music. It's not just any random store. There's such an identity. And DC, like most urban areas in the country, is going through, a difficult process of gentrification.
Right.
And this music got shut down recently as a result of that.
Talk about
I just realized we've been talking about this for a couple of minutes, and I finally said, no, the music got shut down.
Oh, snap.
And that's what the story was about, is suddenly people were walking by, driving by, going, hold on, I don't hear any music here. And when this caught wind, the city rallied. People said, hold on a second. This can't happen. So,
wait, can you back up a little bit?
Yeah.
Can you talk about why did you say gentrification is the reason why the music got shut down?
Okay, I'm about to get there. So, people in the community got, they reached out. They said, hey, what's going on to the shop owner? And they said, well, some residents of a new mixed-use condo across the street have complained and threatened a lawsuit, actually, to threaten Metro PCS with a lawsuit if we don't shut the music down. And so Metro PCS said, listen, we're gonna take away your authorization to sell if you don't cut the music off. And so a couple of days of no music, the city rallied together and said, hold on, we can't allow this to happen, right? This is unacceptable by all means. So there was a quick rally earlier this week in the parking lot right across the street. Music was played. 20 or so people from the community got on a loudspeaker to just share their testimonies about the music and what it means to them and to their community, and memories growing up about this. It was live streamed, I believe, on We Act Radio. There was a lot of local news coverage, and there was so much support. And then the next day, there was an even bigger rally a few blocks down the street where some high-profile go-go bands performed at 14th and U, about 7 blocks down.
Yep.
And that was even bigger because that first rally got the word further out and amplified, and then the street was shut down. This was a massive rally. And it all comes down to, again, complaints from that new mixed-use condo building. Mixed use, if you're not familiar, means like retail stores on the bottom and, living residential units up top. Mm-hmm. And it arguably started from one person, right? Now, maybe a lot of the people in there don't like the music as well. They're right across the street from this shop with the speakers. But it came down to one person who lobbied all the way up to the president of Metro PCS and said, I will sue you over this music.
The privilege,
right? And I'm wondering, what is it like to go about your life and just be like, I got money for a lawyer today. Right. That must be pretty nice, right? Over what? Nothing. So here's the issue. Here's the real issue is you can't have visited those condos. There's no time of day you would have been able to visit those condos without hearing that music. Mm-hmm. So somebody made the conscious decision to buy that home despite that music. And once they settled in, they decided they got enough money and weight to throw around that they were going to disrupt the heartbeat of, honestly, let's just say of an entire city.
Right.
This is one intersection, but that's how big it is. And it's nuts. And it just highlights, for me, I just don't understand what is going through your mind that you can come in, be totally new to a place, and think that you alone and your personal preferences and your needs can trump an entire city. Mm-hmm. You're new here. If you're going to buy a place, if you're going to move in, I think in a reasonable world, it's not crazy to ask you to respect the cultures and customs that you're entering into and not come in, throw your weight around. Those condos are super expensive already, so you've got a lot of resources just to have that condo. Then to throw that weight around and say, I'm going to have a lawyer, I'm going to hire a lawyer and shut your business down. I just don't want the music off. I'll threaten lawsuits and we'll take away your authorization. Like, that is the height of
Privilege.
Narcissism.
And narcissism. Yes.
And all right, so it occurs to me that we say we're going to come back from the break with positive stories. And now I've been down on this for a long time. But the point is, word of this hashtag Don't Mute DC got to the CEO of T-Mobile, who owns Metro PCS, and he says, look, I looked into it, and the music can go on. Now, he also said they've got to work with neighbors, to compromise on a volume, which to me is like, no, they don't. Right. Why? 25 years. Everybody has buy-in except for you who just moved in across the street.
Everybody has buy-in except for you.
The compromise is stop complaining. You bought the condo here. You knew this was happening. That's the compromise. So I don't like the idea of compromise over the volume and working together. Working together would be the people who have this privilege understanding now that they overstepped their boundaries.
Right. It's not illegal to play music at that volume at that time of day. In D.C., and I don't know about other cities, but there are certain hours of the day where you cannot file a noise complaint. Right. You're up and active. This is a city. It's lively and it's loud.
And it's not that I don't feel for those people, because I used to live in an apartment up on 7th Street in Chinatown in D.C., and that is a similar hub of retail and nightlife and everything. It's loud. And you know what I did? Those days that I wanted some quiet, I just had to deal with the people on bullhorns, the guy on the bullhorn who stands on the crate, talking about Jesus and everything, the black Israelites, the guys playing music, or the people singing with their little amps. Yeah. You know what? When I just wanted quiet and that annoyed the living hell out of me, I had to just deal with it. Like, that's it, because I chose that apartment on the street directly above a thriving, booming social and retail business hub. Right. That was my choice. Right. So I'm not going to demand that the entire city change because it's Saturday afternoon and all I want is peace and quiet. If I wanted peace and quiet, move out to a farm. Okay?
No word.
And that goes on all the time, similar to the music. So I get it. I would be annoyed by that music, but that's why I don't live there. Well, I can't afford it. That's why I don't live there. But that would be a reason why it would make sense to not buy that place. I don't care it's beautiful or cute or whatever. I don't care. All that goes out the window if you moving in means you're also going to then try and tell an entire city to not be who it is. So Anyway, success. We won. The music is back on. Everybody was super excited. Everybody was celebrating. And so that was a big win.
I'm literally about to go to Metro PCS right now, because if you didn't know, at that Metro PCS they will fix your phone. Can I just let me just add this little story. I always do this. I went to the Apple store. They wouldn't fix my phone screen. It's all cracked up because my phone has water in it. And I'm just looking at Apple like, why did you make a water resistant phone if you're gonna make all a big deal about people getting water in it? I dropped it in some water, but when I realized, nothing happened, this phone is really waterproof, I'd be doing anything with this phone. Out in the rain, texting. In the shower, texting. You know what I'm saying? Phone, wet, texting, screen cracked, nothing wrong. Take it to the Apple store, water in your phone, we can't fix it. And I said, I know who will. The Metro PCS on Georgia Avenue, because they fixed my phone for me before. And I'm going there today, and I'm going to bump to some go-go music, and I'm going to get my phone fixed, and they're going to make my Saturday beautiful. And I'll be texting in the rain on my way down there.
I love it. Okay, so speaking of making days beautiful, what is the school program on Friday nights making life beautiful for students?
I'm actually really, really, really excited to talk about this story, because when I read about it, it lifted my whole spirit, and I said, that is what you call commitment to education and commitment to student life and livelihood. So in Westside High School in Newark, New Jersey, they have a program called Lights On, right? And it happens every single Friday night after hours. All of the kids are permitted to come back into the school building to have this Friday night full of recreation and fun and social life. So they come in and they have a dance program. The cheerleaders get to practice their cheers. The basketball players are in the gym. Some of the kids are just in the gym kicking it, hanging out, because that's where they want to spend their Friday night. And they're inside of the school building instead of being out on the streets, getting into Lord knows what type of trouble in Newark, New Jersey on a Friday night. And a lot of the kids just expressed a lot of gratitude. I'm really thankful that the principal opens these doors and allows us to come back in here, because I feel safe and I feel like someone cares about me. And the school in the past was having issues of their students being murdered. And since they started doing Lights On Fridays, they haven't lost one student to violence on the street. Not one kid has been killed versus I think the previous year they lost 4 kids to violence on the street. So, I mean, I don't know if you don't think that's a testimony to the effectiveness of the program, but more than just that, the principal, when they come in, they're being served hot meals when they get there. There's a functioning laundry facility for them to like wash their school uniforms, because he noticed that a lot of kids were like skipping school because they're being bullied for being called dirty because their clothes weren't clean. And the attendance and punctuality rate has like gone up dramatically since he installed the washing machines. Like, just single-handedly changing the culture of the entire school, literally saving lives, literally preserving the education of kids who would have missed school entirely. Like, in my perspective of it, was the difference between being committed to a child's learning and being committed to a child's life, right? A lot of educators can pride themselves on the fact that I know the data, my kids are growing, my test scores are really, really high, I come to work on time every day, I'm doing all of these interventions, and I'm committed to education. And yes, applaud for that, because it's a lot of work. But this man said, you know what? There's a bigger problem when you choose to serve inner city Black children. You get to be committed to their learning, and you get to understand that that can be a ticket to success, but you also must, and you have the responsibility to understand that them having high test scores is essentially a non-factor when they don't feel safe, when their life is literally at risk every single day, when they don't have food, when they don't have clothes to wear, when they don't have any place to go. And you also have committed yourself to making sure that you on the underside are effectively, you know what I'm saying, solving and resolving those issues. And that's what Principal Akbar Cook has done for those students in Newark, New Jersey.
So, yeah, I love this idea because, well, first of all, I mean, even if crime and physical danger and things like that aren't a threat to these kids, maybe in your neighborhood or whatever, where can you go?
Me?
On a weekend? As kids, as high school kids, where do you go? Right? What do we have? I mean, we even have conversations now as adults to be like, well, where can you go socially other than a bar? Right?
Right.
Adults are having these conversations. So if you're high school kids, maybe you don't have a car, you're not old enough to drive yet, where can you go? You know, and some towns have, you know, and cities have different things that you can do and where you can go, maybe. But overall, there's just, I think in our society at large right now, it seems like we have a huge lack and a gap of places where we can all go communally and socially together, right, to spend free time. And most of the time, wherever we can go involves spending money as well, right? For adults, okay, go to a coffee shop. All right, well, now we got to buy coffee and snacks and, you know, little muffins and stuff, right? Or like there's just not a lot of options, and especially at night. Because, okay, during the day, what do we go to a park or something like that? Where do you go at night? So that's what I love also, that it's just an option that's obviously needed, you know? Because if it's up to every individual kid to figure out somewhere to go, there's only so many other friends' houses, you know, they can go to. Only so many kids can get together at somebody's house, if that's an option, right? And maybe it's not an option because apartment living is tough, right? And things like that. So you just can't really host a lot of kids. So I love that. And I also love the idea that we got to be just open to solutions. If you see a problem, what are we going to do? You got an idea? Let's run with it. You know, we got to be creative and just really, I think, free and loose with the idea. If you got a solution, let's run with it. Support it. If it fails, okay, so be it. Which is why, you know, like we talked about, you know, the school district in Colorado that said, we're struggling. You're not going to fund us. We're just going to have to cut schools on Mondays. We just have to do it. And that's completely opposite of this, which is less resources than more resources on Friday night. But the point is, we need solutions and we need dramatic actions to be taken.
Right.
And I applaud both of those moves, even though they're kind of in the opposite direction. You know, one is providing less services, the other is providing more. But we got to do something because so many of our systems and our networks and our institutions are overburdened or failing to serve the needs that they're, you know, assigned. So I love it. It's great.
It's actually a beautiful thing, and I strive and aspire to be that type of educator one day. Like, I want to be the person who is so secure not even secure, because they didn't even mention the students' grades or scores or anything. And honestly, I think that as much as it matters, this person has an understanding that, you know, what he's doing for them in their life is just far more important, and it exceeds how they're performing in the classroom. It's still a school, and I'm sure there's still an urgency around academia, but there's a greater urgency around saving their lives. And I aspire to understand that, like, my students' lives are important, and I need to do more to make sure that they are secure, safe, and provided for. So I applaud.
Cool.
So, Steve, I know that we are talking about education, we're talking about schools, yada, 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 but we want to wrap this up on a good note. So talk about Georgetown. Tell us about it.
Okay, so the university in D.C. recently had a referendum for the students to vote on, and it was known as the GU 272 referendum. And what that is Georgetown University 272, in reference to the slaves that were sold way back when in antiquity to basically fund and support the university's operations, right? And so there's been a growing movement to kind of come to terms and reconcile this past and this history that essentially, like, the university exists because of those lives sold in it was 1838 by the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus. And so they had these slaves, they sold them, gave the money to Georgetown so that they could go on and grow and keep thriving. And so there's been a growing movement, and the referendum is 66.1% voted in favor of this.
Yeah.
And I didn't even say what this is.
I'm saying yeah.
Yeah, I just realized. Okay, the referendum to pay reparations, to add a new student fee, which will then go towards programs and opportunities and funding for descendants of these 272 sold slaves.
What are the programs going to be? Wait a minute. Go ahead. Tell me more. Is that the story? Because I have questions.
Ask away.
Okay, so my questions are this: what are the programs going to be, and will they in any way, like, benefit Blackness at large, or is it something that is specifically going to benefit that person?
What, that person? What do you mean, that person?
Like the person so you're saying it's going to go into, like, their student account, and then they get to use it for programs at school?
No, so this money, the actual program that will be established has not been parsed out yet.
Got it. Okay.
So, but the idea is that this would create a fund, and it can go to some of the proposed projects are related to educating K through 12 education, to funding K through 12 education, or making college scholarships, purchasing supplies and materials, things like that. So it's all there's proposals out in the air, but right now the referendum was just, do we want to make this financial contribution? And it'll be a per semester student fee of $27.20 or $272.
So when they say K through 12 programs or college scholarships, blah, 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 that's directly that's for Black people who are descendants of soul slaves.
Descendants of these 272.
Got it. And how are they what are they doing? DNA test results?
Well,
I guess there's going to be a way to verify that you're a descendant of those.
There will be some way, and in fact, some of the people. There's a man named Lee Baker who's a descendant of a married couple who were sold as two of these 272 slaves.
That's nice.
So there is a connection here. It's not just like some student said, "Hey, hold on, let's do something about this." There are links and connections to these folks historically.
Yeah.
So the nitty-gritty of how they'll be identified and all that, I'm not really sure. And what the money will actually go to, not really sure. But again, it'll be a per student, per semester, $27.20 fee on top of tuition and things like that. And now it's got to get approved by the board of directors of the university. And this is also the highest turnout for an election, for a student association election in Georgetown in a long time. I just misplaced the number, but in several years. So that was cool too. And if it gets approved by the board of directors, then all the implementation and everything will come out. And I hope they do, because I'll tell you one thing, you know what administrators are not shy about in university?
What?
Hiking up tuition.
At all.
So I don't see the ground.
What's them $27 going to do?
If the majority of students, 66.1%, support this, what's the ground? Like, you guys love hiking up fees. College administrators love boosting fees. So I couldn't understand what the opposition would be. And I haven't read anything as to where like the board of directors is leaning and feels on this. Mostly all the reporting, and I'm going off of the Hoya mainly, which is Georgetown newspaper, because shout out to local media and things like that, right? Hey. So that was a cool thing, and it's also important, I think, the timing, because some presidential candidates are talking about the idea of endorsing the idea of reparations, right? Heard. And this is kind of getting a lot of buzz, and people are like, huh, what? Wait, I don't know.
You know what I would appreciate, and I'm not going to complain about it because it's actually a nice thing. I'm thinking of my little critiques that I have in my mind, and like, oh, okay, I got my eyes squinted up a little bit, but you really can't complain when someone is trying to make strides towards doing something right or righting a wrong. So it's reparations. What I will say is, would I rather have 40 acres and a mule? Yeah, I would. But will I take educational equity or financial stability in terms of education? I'll take it. It's 2019. I'll take it.
It's a step.
It's a step, and I hope other schools follow suit.
That's right. So I think that's going to do it for today. That's everything on the list. You got anything else?
No, I'm good to go.
Cool. All right. Well, on that note, let's get out of here. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I am Steve Discourse.
I am Jay Callie.
That's the deal.
All right, people, thanks so much for tuning in another week. What's the Deal podcast?
You can follow us on social media
at Steve Discourse.
And you can catch Jay Callie.
It's Jay Callie, ITSJAYCALLI.
We got to send a big shout out to Clifford Cartel for composing our theme music. And wherever you listen to this, make sure you subscribe.
Family, subscribe.
Write us a review.
Share the podcast. Subscribe to it wherever you listen.
Share it with your friends, family, your loved ones. Heck, share it with your enemies. We don't care. Just help us spread that word. We truly appreciate it.